Okay, hi Monica.
Hi, Courtney.
I wanted to talk with you actually about downward facing dog anyway, because I was noticing that a lot of teachers kind of almost overcorrected it, there were so many contrasting cues given that I found that it was almost messing me up more than helping me.
You want me to respond to this?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. Well, I guess one of the big things that I've really been playing with down dog lately that I think is really important that I see a lot of students not doing is, especially in the sun salutations, but I think that carries over into when we go into the pose. People tend to push back kind of straight through their shoulders. And so then it's very difficult for them to access their those big back muscles, the rhomboids and the trapezius and the latissimus dorsi. And so what I have my students do actually is before they go back, they need to push up. They kind of push through their hands and push the body up and to bypass the shoulders, and then to kind of come back into your roof shape or your stretching dog shape. Because the number one thing I see is students kind of getting caught up in the shoulders. Once you're in there, I mean, I think, if the students are using their breath properly and, accessing their glutes and accessing the big back muscles, I don't see a lot of corrections that really need to be made.
Yeah, and the other day when we were talking, you said something that I've heard also another one of my teachers say, which is the fact that, that cue of putting the index finger or the middle finger and having it be straight with the edge of the mat is not necessarily ideal for everybody's wrists or body, that having a slight turnout might actually make sense in order to maintain the alignment of the, upper arm bone within the glenoid fossa.
And I'm still playing with this. For me, comfort-wise, it is a little slight bit of a turnout. So it's almost, I think, kind of between my middle finger and index finger. But I was playing actually with my teacher training students 2 weeks ago, and for one of my students, it was more comfortable to have the middle finger facing forward. So I'm beginning to, my theory is, all of our bones are shaped differently. And so I think it's going to kind of depend on, where the wrist is going to naturally fall in position to the hand as far as where it lands. Like I'm looking at my hand right now. Actually, I'm going to get on the ground. I'm looking at my hand right now, and the place where I have the most opening, I think, if that makes sense, the place where my wrist becomes most opening and not being impinged is with turning my index finger slightly out. Again, probably more between the index finger and the middle finger as what's facing the mat. But again, I think that's going to depend on every student. And to be honest, I think that's important, but I really think if you're correcting the back muscles, that's important, obviously, to stay out of the wrists and for pain management. But if students who are in the shoulders, you're putting a lot more stress on the wrist to start. And so for me, the big one is really ensuring that students are staying connected to the core and they're using that serratus anterior, which connects from the intercostal muscles into those big back muscles, and making sure that that's active and keeping that all up. I don't know if I've answered that or spoken to that the way. Do you want to speak to that a little more?
Well, I just think that I've almost had to ignore some of the teachings that have come my way in order to find the pose within my body that really supports the structure. Just because I find it's the most over-cued pose. Like people go all over the top of, where your tailbone should be, where your heels should be, how your hamstrings should be active. And even there was one class that I went to that suggested, because how you think like, oh, I can't bend my knees because then people will think like I'm not a great yogi. People think that all the time. Can't bend my knees in down dog, can't bend my knees in uttanasana.
But It's
But
true.
I bend my knees in downward facing dog sometimes just to kind of feel the way that that creates some freedom within the pelvis. And I can push away from the floor a little bit more easily. And then that changes it. I have to get rid of like the ego and the perfection. And I think sometimes when we over cue, it gives the message that there is a perfect down dog.
And of course, there's not a perfect pose at all. And of course, it depends on all of the students. And I agree with the over cueing. And I think a lot of teachers, though, start from the top up. So they focus a lot on the feet, or they focus a lot on the hands. And again, the feet, I've had teachers cue, to have the heels on the floor. And the reality is you have bone compression at the front of the foot. And so that, where your bone hits there is going to very much, is the word I'm looking for. Basically, that's going to determine how far you can take the heel down. So for me, I can get my heel on the floor, but then I cease to feel anything, and then I'm not connecting to my core anymore. So my heels are never going to be on the floor, and you can really see this if you have students, get in a squat, because the squats really show kind of the bone compression in that ankle area, and where it's really hitting, and how it's preventing students, from getting deeper or lower into the squat, but still keeping straight up and down. I think less is more. And I think, for me, my focus is always about, again, about, are they using the core correctly? Are they using the glutes correctly? And are they using the deep back muscles correctly? Because the other thing I see a lot of is students think if they're going deeper with their back, like the more that they're taking their back down, going into the pose, that, again, I think they sometimes think that's an advanced version. And again, the reality is that, do you understand what I'm saying can you get that visual, what I'm saying?
Yeah, I can.
But what's happening there is at that point, they are basically starting to compress the lumbar spine, which again, we mean the vertebra are rubbing against vertebra. And, what prevents them from going any deeper is the compression. And so you want to not, you don't want that to be an issue at all. And again, the way you make that not an issue is you make sure the abdominals are very much engaged and the deep back muscles are engaged, and you're pulling up the pelvic floor and you're connecting to the glutes. And if you're doing all of these things, it's actually physically impossible to shove yourself deep into that position. And speaking of the ego, I think a lot of the teachers and students I've worked with, it's really hard because they feel like somehow that they're doing less of the pose, and they're somehow less of an advanced yogi or something like that. And I don't like the term advanced yogi in general. I think that's kind of BS. But yeah, but so that's, I think that, but that's the thing is I see the most is that, that pushing, thinking that you're going deeper, thinking that you're, pushing more. And the reality is at that point, you're really shoving your body into a space that is unhealthy for the body.
Yeah, I think I feel the same way you do, that I'm constantly playing with it. And obviously this is a pose that I've been doing for, well over a decade. And yet there's still a lot of exploration to be done with it. And since I think, getting better at not pushing, I'm recognizing that really, if I'm doing a down dog that is honest, that it makes me feel very balanced and very aware of all the edges and the corners of my body, the way that I'm breathing in a moment, all of these things, it really infuses me with awareness. But if I get so caught up in what it looks like and, how I need to do it and how I need to look a certain way, then it already disrupts that flow for me. But to find a place where I'm not, like, where I might, yes, have to turn my wrists out, or I might be doing something that is not necessarily classical downward facing dog. might actually be supporting the structure of my body better. But it's interesting how long that takes.
Well, and I want to say this too, because I know, we both know you're very strong, and, your challenge, of course, is flexibility, which I think because of your yin, you are flexible, but that's your challenge. My challenge is the opposite, which is I tend to be hyper flexible. But I know students who are doing it correctly. This is the interesting piece too, because, once upon a time when I did down dog, it was one of the easiest poses in the world, and I could just lay there forever and feel like I was, that advanced yogi and deep and la la la. And the thing that I've noticed actually is the more you use your body correctly, the more difficult it becomes. And because it actually requires a lot of strength and a lot of power to hold that pose correctly. And that's the really interesting thing I get to with my teacher trainers, who suddenly they're, I'm putting them into down dog, and I'm having them, use those big muscles for the first time sometimes. And they're literally complaining that it's hard. And I just kind of look at them and I laugh, and I'm like, well, isn't that kind of the point? In the way that it's a safe hard. They, again, they're so used to just kind of laying in the pose, really laying in our wrists, laying in our shoulder joints, pushing the heels down, but not really using our glutes, focusing on the hamstrings. Because again, really, when you're using the glutes properly, your hamstrings will not take, you're not going to feel it nearly as much. You really won't. And so, to say to a student, you want to feel it in the hamstrings, I'm not sure that that's necessarily, a good thing per se. I mean, we're stretching parts, but to me, done correctly, you should not feel it in the hamstrings. You should just feel like your glutes are working super, super hard, and they're protecting your hamstrings so that you're not feeling that pain.
Yeah. And I did read that like one of the biggest injured areas for people who are doing a lot of yoga is the hamstrings, especially the really, really flexible ones who are just hanging out in down dog and who actually get the phrase, here we are in down dog as a resting pose, which really annoyed me when I first started yoga, because again, I was not flexible naturally. And when somebody said that, I was like, are you kidding me? I am not resting, and that's become a really big phrase right now of here we are in a resting pose, especially in the power, in a powerful sequence. And maybe that's true if you're, hanging out in a lot of warriors or doing a lot of chair poses and really firing up the legs. Maybe as comparison, it's not quite so intense, but I would not call it easy.
I don't know. I think done correctly, it will be equally intense. I mean, you may have. I think done correctly, all of the poses are intense, and I think again, in a lot of ways, you had an advantage. I realized that you didn't realize this at the time, and we're not happy about this.
Yeah, for sure.
You had an advantage because you skipped that whole part, which, again, I think it's very difficult sometimes to, kind of retrain students to, start to use the body correctly when they've been, doing it a certain way for so long. And again, there's that, the biggest thing I hear and the biggest resistance is I'm not feeling the pose anymore. And again, that's that vertebra rubbing against vertebra. But yeah, I mean, I think even child's pose, it's really interesting. I mean, done correctly is a working pose. And, but I give in between, because I'm working students in all of the poses hard, a lot of times, I will, let them rest in child's pose or let them kind of do it in half dog, but I still want them using the muscles correctly. Which is why sometimes I just say to them, you may want to just lay on your stomach or lay on your back, because I still want it to feel restorative. And so if the, keeping the body in its healthy position is still straining you during this resting time, I may need to put you in an even more safe position. Because even something like, child's pose or half dog, which are really variations of downward facing dog in some ways, which I think we use to modify the pose often, it can be unsafe still on the lumbar spine.
Agreed.
We're still on the hip flexors when done, unthinkingly, and not really, again, using the big muscle groups to support that, and just laying in the body.
We have to talk about, next time we'll have to talk about child's pose and other quote unquote resting postures. I think that would be a good topic.
I think that would be a great topic.
Yeah. Thanks, Monica.
I think
enlightening as always.
No, baby, you enlighten too. This is what it's all about. Come on, get real, really. But I'm trying to think if I had any more closing things on downward facing dog, as far as just things to be thoughtful about. But I really think at the end of the day, it's with all the poses, it's just about having the students really listen to their body and what's comfortable. And if it's not feeling comfortable, to get them to start a conversation. This is where I'm feeling this, and then that's when the teacher, that's when the teacher can come in and start to help the student. And so in that sense, you can get the students into the position, but then you can come around and you can give individual cues, because again,
yes,
normally we keep students in downward facing dog, even in sun salutations, longer. And so the teacher really does have an opportunity to go around and really give some individual cues. And the thing is, the more you do that, the more the student internalizes it and remembers, this is my cue for my body.
True.
So, okay, baby.
Thank you.
More you want to say on down dog?
No, I think that's a good kicking off place, for even people to think about in their own bodies. And I think this is one of the best things about teacher training, whether or not you actually become a teacher or not, it gets you to ask these questions and to look at things for yourself, rather than going and hearing a generic cue and thinking that it must be true about you, when to go in that direction actually moves you more to, a state, where you're not in your best form and you could possibly be hurting yourself. So I think that's the best thing. Whenever I train my trainees and I'm talking to them, I always find it's very cool to see that it's almost like it's a huge change to listen to their own bodies. And I find that, I know we hear that all the time in yoga. We're like, listen to your body, listen to your breath, listen to your mind. But when you really do that, you might have to actually ignore others' teachers' voices in order to listen to your own voice and your own body and what feels positive and strong and stable on that given day. Even if downward dog is no longer appropriate on that day, even if the day before down dog felt great. But when you're trying to connect all the points, you find that actually it doesn't feel stable. And if you were honest, half dog was more appropriate.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. Yeah. So.
Yay, big Y.
This has been fun. It's been great. So so this is our first take on the Big Y, and we hope you've enjoyed listening.
Yes, we are going to try to tackle all these different sorts of topics. So hopefully we will hear from you and you'll be interested in these topics as much as we are.
Oh, and feel free to post comments or questions in the bottom. We can't guarantee that we'll get to all of them, but at the very least, it will give us fodder for future podcasts. So
yes.
Thank you so much. Have a beautiful day.
You too.
Bye, baby. Mwah.
Bye.